know, Jerry Sip was supposed to be leading this discussion, but unfortunately he's dealing with a death in the family. And also one of our panelists, Joanna Edwards, is dealing with a family emergency. So we all miss them. And I hope that you will send good thoughts and prayers their way, because I'm sure they would appreciate them. So tonight we are going to be having a panel discussion again on casting. And so it's going to begin with questions prepared for our panelists. And then at the end, we will have time for audience questions. If you have an audience question during the course of the panel, feel free to type it in on Facebook as a comment underneath the video, and they'll get the questions back to us. So we are really looking forward to what this is going to inspire, and I hope that you'll be inspired to ask some great questions. All right, so first of all, we want to introduce our panelists. Let's start with Angela Santucci.
Hi, everybody. I'm Angela Santucci. I'm a private voice teacher and also a theater and music instructor. I have been for about 20 years now in the Triangle, and I work with a lot of youth theater groups, and I run a small private studio.
Thank you, Angela. And next we have Asabi Howard.
Hello, I bring you greetings from North Carolina Central, where I chair the theater department. And when I'm not teaching or directing there, I try to get out and do some other things in the community and professionally.
Thank you. And last we have Eric Mitchko.
Hi, I'm Eric Mitchko. I'm the General Director of North Carolina Opera, which is based here in Raleigh. It's the Triangle's opera company, and we have just announced our new season.
Great, thank you. All right, so why don't we begin by talking about casting in general? What goes into the process of casting, and what are some challenges about casting decisions that might surprise folks who have never cast a show before?
Well, I know for me, and maybe this is very basic, I start off with having a concept, and it may not be fair, but I also probably have a vision, but I stay open so that people come in and can break that vision. You know, when I read about the characters, I see them. And so I have an idea of what this person is going to look like. And even if I'm not sure, when they walk through the door, I'm like, yep, that's that character. But I'm always open to somebody that may not fit that vision perfectly. But I say start with a concept and stay open. I also say stay true to the playwright's vision. And I know we'll maybe talk later about non-traditional casting and how that has a place and all of that. But I think that's important as well.
I agree. I think serving the story is number one. But having worked in education for so long, sometimes you kind of cross your fingers and go, well, I picked this play. I certainly hope enough kids come out for it. And, you know, as always, you're going, I hope some guys show up. And so I've worked really hard in my education years to try to find a lot of female heavy plays, because I know, you know, 3 guys will show up to my auditions. But as long as the story is served, I'm open to whoever walks in that door and wows me. And I've been delighted over the years with the times that the unexpected has happened, and I go, oh wow, that just has to happen right now. And I don't so much see the characters in my head so much as I hear them, and I hear jokes landing in my head, and I know what I want that to sound like. And sometimes kids come in and just blow me out of the water, and so I throw them in like, and no one expects it, and I don't expect it, and that's wonderful.
With opera, of course, it's a little different from spoken theater, because the vocal requirements, the musical ones, are really the most important thing, and what a singer looks like is very much secondary. You know, there aren't that many people who have the minimum requirements in terms of voice and musicianship and technique. So it's and there are probably maybe more people involved in the casting process, because you could have a stage director and a conductor who had a very different, and then me, who all might have very different ideas about how a role ought to be cast.
Yeah, I would say that happens. Sometimes I'm the music director, and sometimes I'm the director, and sometimes I have to say to the director, actually, no, we really need someone who can hit that high note, and that actor can't. I'm really sorry. So we need to go this direction instead. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
And Angela, I'm glad that I thought it was just Black men that didn't come out. I didn't know it was men in general.
Yep. Yep.
What she said in the play about needing more basses in the chorus, that's
That's
always
true.
true.
Right.
Oh my goodness. I mean, just hoping to have enough high school guys walk through the door to sing anything is, much, right, like Shakespeare, maybe you're kind of like, you'll get some more, but a musical, ooh, you're really hoping and praying for that.
I'm with you. And maybe that's another point that so often, particularly in education and some other venues as well, you have to deal with who you have. And sometimes you have to be creative in that. If it's a little bit subpar and not exactly the standard that you would want, but you work with who you have.
I think sometimes too, I've had to convince students that no, you really can hit that note. You can hit that high A needed for, I think Mary Poppins was a few years ago that I was working on. And I had a couple of girls left for callbacks, and I knew, as a voice teacher, I can hear a lot of what they maybe don't know they can already do. And I just kind of, I don't want to say force that out of them, but I really encourage it to hopefully get, it doesn't always work, but sometimes I think that you can grab something and pull it out of a child, or I say a student, and get them into a role that maybe they thought they couldn't do. But if they're really too hesitant with it, you can't push them into a role they don't feel comfortable doing.
Yeah. I think I'm like you. Well, I was like you, Angela, years ago when I was younger. I was like, give me the worst case scenario and I'll make it work. I'm going to pull it out of this person and I'm going to make them wonderful. And now I'm like, okay, can I have somebody to work with this person?
Yep.
Have you ever been in a situation where you tried that and then you got into the rehearsal process and realized this is just not going to work? And how long do you go before making a change in that situation? Or do you just tough it out and we're gonna make it happen?
Well, one time a student made the change for me, dropped out of the show about 2 weeks in, and he was
Wow.
one of only 8 boys, so then we were down to 7, and that was a little bit much, but we worked it out. But I couldn't really, I don't think I could have said, no, we can't work with this, because I think in education you don't get to do that. You just kind of stick it out. But his audition was pretty good, and then we got into rehearsals and it was kind of like, oh dear. And he just kind of went, I don't think this is for me. And I was like, okay, fair enough. So it kind of worked out. So I've never had to have that hard conversation.
I think as soon as I see it's not going well, I try to change it, not to get too far in the process. Now, I am known for changing certain things before close to opening. If I keep looking at it and it's not working, for example, we were doing For Colored Girls, and I think I had broken up parts of one of the poems, and one of the girls I had given a lot to, and I realized, oh no, I shouldn't have given her that much. So I talked to her about it, it's not working, and I gave direction and we worked on it, and it just didn't get any better. So about 2 days before opening, I gave it to someone else. And this was probably one of the only cases where that young lady, she was distraught, but she was determined. And she said, no, Dr. Shelby, please, I will work, I will get it. And before opening night, she did. But I was ready for the other performer to take those lines.
Wow. All right. So as we continue to look and see the changes made in casting over the years, we have started to see some progress in equity, diversity, and inclusion when it comes to casting. So what kind of what kinds of progress do you see being made in providing more casting opportunities for women, people of color, LGBTQ actors, the physically challenged, and other groups that used to face challenges, systemic challenges when it came to casting?
I hate myself for not remembering her name, but I think that the Tony Award that went to the young woman who played, I think, Ado Annie in Oklahoma a few years ago from a wheelchair. Well, maybe 2 years ago. The pandemic changes time, of course, so I don't remember. I think that was a huge, huge leap. I wish I could have seen it to see how that worked and how they worked with her and she worked with them, because wow, yeah, I don't know that could have happened before that time.
I agree. I think for people of color, we see each other. I mean, we see people of color on the screen, and more often than we have over the years. One of the things when I went to South Africa, looking at TV, every time I turned on the TV, I saw a brown face, and it was like, wow. And then it made me remember in America that wasn't the case, and even growing up, it was just for granted, you know. So I love the idea. Now I can go to Netflix, and there are a whole slew of movies that I can choose from that are about or by African American people or people of color. So I think we see people of color more on the screen, and then that kind of filters down to theater, and it affects each other, you know. So now The Wiz has become a film, and now we see The Wiz that is now on TV, like Dreamgirls and the August Wilson series. So I think there is exposure there. I think there's recognition of performers. We do see more performers getting Tonys, performers of color, and not just the performers, but people in other areas, the designers, the directors. And so it does make me feel like there's a sense of recognition. And now saying that, I do think there's still struggles and there's still a long way to go, but comparing it to maybe the last 70 years, there is progress.
Yeah, in opera, again, since so much depends on the particular vocal qualities, it's less of an issue on the performing side, although there is still a lot of work to be done, Asabi, as you say, backstage with directors, designers, and a whole backstage crew. And that's still a lot of work to be done there.
Yeah, I definitely feel like I'm seeing, if not total progress when it comes to actors with disabilities, I'm seeing more calls for progress than I used to. I feel like it used to just be given that if you had someone with a disability in a play or a movie, they would just be played by an able-bodied actor. And now there are calls for people with lived experience with disability to be playing those roles. Like, for example, I knew of a theater that was going to be producing Tribes, which is a play that has a main character who's deaf. And when they cast a hearing actor in that role, they caught a lot of flack for it. And their response was, well, we put out audition notices just like we do with the others, and no deaf actors came. And it's like, well, did deaf actors ever feel comfortable performing at your theater before? How are they supposed to know it was okay? Did you say that there was going to be an interpreter at auditions? And it ended up being a big enough controversy that they ended up not putting on the play after all. And it's interesting to see that change. And I hope that it leads to more change with all groups who haven't been represented. But going to Finding My Voice, our featured performance of the evening. So Lee presented many challenges that she faced in casting during her singing career. What challenges do women and non-binary and trans people still face in the entertainment industry? And how can the theater community provide more opportunities?
Well, I think, I mean, we have the idea of non-traditional casting and blind casting. And I think both of those have a place, and it does give opportunity. And I don't know, for example, when we think of all Black cast of Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, I mean, I don't want to think it's non-traditional casting, but maybe it is, because we don't normally see brown people in those roles. But I certainly feel like we live those type of lives, and we can experience that and bring truth to it. But I really think that opportunity gives to color conscious casting. And that, of course, is somewhat staying true. And just as you said, about, if it's a character, a deaf character, then let's have a deaf character. Let's give opportunity to that. So non-traditional casting sometimes erases color. And I think Katora Hall actually said that when they cast a white man as Martin Luther King in The Mountaintop. So I actually think when we do plays that gives way to people of color, to all others, that's the opportunity. I mean, just making it happen, just doing the shows where they can be involved, being totally inclusive of everyone. I hope that made sense. I might have been rambling a little.
Right. I mean, at some point, do you feel like in order for there to be more opportunities, there needs to be more plays written with these kind of roles?
Well, I think that would definitely help with it. I mean, with in opera, like I said, it's slightly different, not just because of the vocal requirements, but because for the most part we have a fairly an old repertoire, right? I mean, at least in the U.S., 80+% of the operas you're going to see at any company were written between 1786 and 1924, and you might think that's constraining, but in some ways it's not, because we've been doing this for so long that we've already gotten in many ways pretty far away from the intentions of the creators. And so we actually do have a lot of latitude. And again, at least in the US, audiences have almost no expectations about what a particular character ought to look like. I think it's a little different in Europe. But we have to remember that in terms of being faithful to the creators' intentions, with very old pieces, you probably don't want to make an exact literal recreation of what it would have looked like, because it'll have a far different effect on your audience, right? If you're in one of the premier audiences of The Marriage of Figaro, and you go and you see that one of the characters, the Count, is wearing a powdered wig, you might not even make notice of it, right? Right, he's at work. He's wearing a powdered wig, of course. Whereas today, if you do a Marriage of Figaro and you put someone in a powdered wig, you're telling your audience something far different. The audience is going to get a different message. Maybe this is an old piece, maybe it's a costume drama, maybe it's something, all kinds of things that would not have been in the minds of Mozart and Da Ponte, and lots of things that they didn't want their audiences necessarily to think of. So in some ways, and it's a guessing game and a bit, being true to what you might think the composer wanted might require diverging from what the actual original look of the show might have been.
I think that's a great point about expectations. I think opportunities could come out of changing audiences' expectations and their perceptions. And I had a class many years ago with some 6th, 7th, 8th graders about that age, and I was casting a play, and this is very basic, mind you, but I put 2 students on stage, and they were going to play this comedic duo, and the kids were like, well, the girl's taller than the guy, that makes no sense, they're supposed to be a couple. And I said, well why can't that be? And they both are doing well, why couldn't they play the roles? And I put them in the roles anyway, despite what the children said. But I think that if you start kind of, if young people can see that not everything not every play has to be done this way, and so on and so forth, then the expectations will change, and then the opportunities can change. They'll expand if you kind of break the expectations.
Right. In the medium or long run, they'll expand. But in the context of the actual production you're working on, it can be a little dodgy for your audience right at the moment.
A little dodgy, yeah.
with the height, this Josef Schmidt. Josef Schmidt was this great tenor who was a big star of German movie musicals in the 30s. You listen to his records, he's a great singer, and he had no stage opera career because he was really short. And that's like you can hide in a movie. He stands on a box or something, and on stage, there's just no way it would have worked.
I think it
At least for audiences of that era.
Yeah, I think it only worked in our situation because it was for a comedic play. I think in a drama, certainly, a dramatic role, definitely not. But I think I like to think I pushed their boundaries a little bit, but that's a good point. Yeah.
I think you did. I think, and maybe this might get to stereotypes, which we may talk about, but some years ago, I went and auditioned for the mother in A Raisin in the Sun. And actually, this was with John Gully. He was my professor when I was at Wake Forest. We hadn't seen each other years. And he was like, Asabi, you're great. And I really wanted to cast you, but everybody in the cast is like 6 feet. Well, if you know me, I'm not 5 feet. I say I'm 5 feet, but I'm really not. And he said, I just don't, I think it'll be too comical. And I understood that. And I was like, I got you. No problem. I'll be back for when you have a role for a shorter kind of, plump person. So
Sure.
yeah, I understood it.
And I want to use your great story to segue into another area that Finding My Voice covers, is that Lee talks about how she felt that with her body type, there came a point where she kept getting typecasted in certain roles, that as someone who was of a larger size, she kept getting cast as like the teacher, the grandma, the maid. And what kinds of challenges do you see when it comes to stereotyping actors of a certain size or body shape, and how can we continue to improve on this area?
Have a great costumer. I did The Bluest Eye, and one of my students who read very well for one of the sisters, it was 2 sisters, and they may be like 12, 14 ideally. But she is very mature, and I want to think she was even a non-traditional student, very mature in nature. She was larger and did not have the shape of a child at all. But I really wanted her in that role, and she did so well. Till we made it work. And the costume, by the time we were finished, you never thought about it. You never thought that she is not a little girl and her body shape doesn't match. That's just one way.
Yeah, no, great costuming. And again, in opera, if the voice works, then people don't care about that. I mean, of all forms of theater, famously opera is the one where,
That's right.
where larger people are at home, right? And it's just because you open your mouth and people are just blown away, right?
Yeah, it's like I saw an interesting thing on Facebook from someone who was typecasted often like in high school because of her size. And it's like, well, when you continually cast a fat person as the funny friend or the teacher or the grandma, you're and never as the love interest or the lead, you're saying, I'm not lovable. I am not a leading person. And do you feel like there comes a point where getting typecasted that much can affect somebody in their personal lives? I mean,
I know from my point of view, definitely. I mean, if we're looking at the history of African-American people and stereotypes, and the whole idea of Jim Crow and the minstrels, the black face minstrels, and definitely, I mean, you look and you think, you're not worthy, you're not accepted, something is wrong because of that. So yeah, and I wonder if we would ever outlive those stereotypes. I think I have taken on the stance that we can't get rid of them, but we have to deal with them differently. And sometimes that is finding the truth in the lie of the stereotype. So we know that, during slavery, Black people dance. I mean, it's part of the African culture. We love to dance, but does every Black person know how to dance? No. Um, so there are some truths to stereotypes, and I think we have to figure out the truths and then dismiss the lies about the stereotype and the ugliness of the stereotype.
Thank you for your comments. That's really helpful. Do you feel like, I mean, I'll open this up to the rest of the panelists as well. Like, what barriers continue to exist for actors of color, and how can institutions break that down? We've been talking about color conscious casting, but is there anything else that needs to happen beyond the casting level in terms of changing the culture?
Well, Angela's point about making changes on the casting level to influence the audience in the long run, I think, is important, because whatever decisions we might make, keeping with the actors in mind, you're still facing the audience out there, and you can tell them stuff, but at some point you can't just dictate to them, and they have the audience has opinions, and at some point, if it's going to be a successful production, you need to take that into account. It's tricky.
Well, I definitely think producing more African American plays, plays of color, not just African American, but we do see that. We see more of it on Broadway, which filters down locally and regionally. But it's a long journey, and it's hard to, when you look at the history, it's hard to kind of make up. So it's continual work. And of course, that means employing African American artists. So the designers and directors and the music directors and that kind of thing. And I think make it relatable. I love Justice Theater Project. You know, they let me do Black Nativity. I wrote it, and they allowed me to put my own spin on it. And so we started off, many times Black Nativity does have this Afrocentric kind of feel anyway, but I was able to specify it. So we had Zulu language in there, and I had the whole idea of the African griot, but that was relatable to African people, to African American people, and just the whole idea of a Black nativity. I mean, it could be an Asian nativity. It's just that it makes the story relatable. And I think we have to do that with color conscious plays and casting and exposure, and then make it accessible, make it accessible. Of course, I could go on and on that. So you just have to stop me with that. All the things that can be done. I mean,
Yeah.
I think
there's
definitely,
a lot.
Adding new repertoire is a big part of it. I mean, last year we did Tyshawn's story, Cycles of My Being, which is really fantastic. This coming season, we're going to do a piece called Sanctuary Road, which is about the Underground Railroad, which I'm very excited about. It's a gorgeous piece. And like I said, 80% of our repertoire is quite old, but plenty of new pieces are being written, and they're good, and people like them. And as the years go on, that percentage will probably drop. It didn't always used to be like that.
Yeah.
I mean, when Verdi was writing, and when Rigoletto and Traviata were new pieces, 80% of the repertoire was brand new. And that's when opera occupied a much more central place in the culture than it does now. But we can still get back to something like that.
Yeah, I'm curious, Eric, are there any initiatives in the opera world to bring in new creators of plays, like to bring in new people in the process of creating new works?
Yeah, definitely. Opera America has a program like that, and now we have a couple of scholars have been working on this piece called this Black Opera Database that has a whole big database of operas, not just by Black composers, but also on Black, what we might call Black themes. And there's high interest in the industry for that now. And this is an area I would say where the producers in the industry is probably more committed to this at the moment than the audiences are, although of course we hope that will change in short order.
Yeah. But Eric, I think you bring a good point in that there are new works, and oftentimes I don't think we research enough. One of my
It's
white
work. It's hard.
friends, yeah, right. One of my white artists said, you know, who I can't remember how he said it. He said, what Black playwrights are on Broadway now? And I'm like, really? And he said, I know, I'm so bad to ask you that. I mean, I know August Wilson, everybody knows August Wilson, but then there's so many other names to know, and there's so many other works. I myself did research on queer material, and there's tons of it out there, and some of it specified to Black people. Who knew? But you know, you got to do the research and look for those new plays.
I think among producers and among the theater audience, there's a great appetite for this.
Mhm.
You know, how far this interest extends outside of people who routinely go to the theater, I don't know. That's the thing that would be the next thing for us really to work on, in order that we not, you know, just be talking to ourselves about this, right?
Yeah, I think you're right. So building an audience certainly has to become part of it.
Right. And that, of course, that's a problem even beyond, I mean, like, I mean, audiences are getting older as well. And how do we continue to make theater accessible for younger people, accessible for all people, so that we can continue to enjoy this ancient art and
Yeah.
I which also brings me to, so with the pandemic, and all of the experiences that we went through the last year, it feels like this offered an opportunity for people to create their own ways of getting their work out there, and for finding new ways to put content out and have people see it, and more ways to have people outside of your geographic area see it. How do you think that the pandemic has affected casting when it comes to these kinds of opportunities? And do you think it's going to have a lasting impact once the pandemic, God willing, is over?
Well, depending on what kind of a show you're doing, it removes the problem of someone's geographic availability, or at least reduces it.
It makes the audition process interesting. People from everywhere, it's kind of to Eric's point, can submit auditions from anywhere. And I think that so many people were forced into this, oh my gosh, I have to learn all this technology now. I didn't know what Zoom was until last year. And so now people are thinking, oh, well, if I can do Zoom, I could tape my own auditions. I don't need to hire someone. I can, submit my tapes. I can take my pictures, and I can do all these things with this technology that now everybody's using. It's not going to be some sort of, oh, well, I can meet you on a video call, and that's kind of odd. Now it's completely normal. So I think I think it makes it more accessible, honestly.
I agree. And I think that I think you mentioned the whole idea that it's more creativity. Creativity came out of the pandemic. And I think more people found a way to tell their own personal story. And somehow, as an audience, I think it makes us more empathetic and sympathetic and involved. And that alone, I think, has to open up more opportunities for casting, for different voices, as people are actually finding their voice, as Lee showed us so well in her performance.
I feel like there's a lot of hope that we will use the pandemic as an opportunity to make radical changes in the arts that need to be changed, but that there's also organizations and industries where their primary concern is righting the ship and getting things back to the way that they used to be as quickly as possible. What do you think arts organizations are going to do after the pandemic, and along that spectrum of change versus return?
I think we really need to see how the digital content is going to play out. You know, we need to, until we know whether this was a temporary thing that people did just so they could continue having some kind of theater and music, or whether it's going to be a big part of the new normal. We don't know that yet. And I think the answer to that question will be an important one for seeing what the revived companies look like.
Great point. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like it's like, is the Zoom play going to flower into its own art form, or are we always going to see it as the poor substitute for live theater? And then once we're able to do live theater again, we'll just drop it and it'll just be one of those artifacts of the pandemic.
Yeah, I think it will continue. Now, I can't watch another Zoom play, anytime soon, but but I
That's the thing, right? I mean,
but somebody can. I just can't, but I think it will continue. And maybe so much not the Zoom play, but the streaming and the live streaming, so that it is happening in real time, but somebody across the world and the country can actually see it. And so that may stay. And it may be, I think that's a good thing. That's that accessibility we're talking about.
Yeah, and in terms of accessibility, like I follow Yiddish theater, and the Yiddish theater Volksbühne, located in New York City, where only people who are in New York City could go to the plays, and then they would have super titles translating the lines. In the pandemic, they were able to create pieces that they could put on YouTube and have automatic subtitles on them, which it increases accessibility for works that aren't in English. It increases accessibility for people who are hard of hearing.
Yeah, I agree.
I think we were very lucky during the pandemic to have all these arts organizations jump to and go, oh, we need to bring this to the people. Although, the Met has been doing that for years. The National Theatre in London has been doing it for years, but all of a sudden all their content was out there. And then, Andrew Lloyd Webber jumped on that bandwagon and everything. And we were also starved for it. That I think a lot more companies will, at least my hope is that they'll kind of make it a more regular thing. I think there's a delicate balance, because you don't want people to substitute, going to a movie theater to see, Benedict Cumberbatch in Hamlet or a Met Opera live stream. That I don't think it should be a substitute for a local theater. I think that's a very careful line. But I think it enhances everyone's programs if it's used wisely.
I think you're right.
The question is how much, when we get together in a room with strangers and we all have a shared experience, theatrical experience, how much is that an integral part of the process? And, otherwise, or can we get the same basic thing from watching it on our screen? I mean, personally, the live communal experience is really integral to what we do. But, you mentioned the Met Opera streams, it's great, but there's so much very, very high quality content out there. I mean, even, someone like me who is, a complete opera nut, there's far more great opera out there available on the internet free that I could possibly watch. And we need to think also at how that will affect demand for our product when we come back.
I think you're right,
accessibility, Eric. And a lot of it is, being good and entertaining. I mean, we talk to the aging audiences, 20 somethings want to be entertained as much as 60 somethings do. But for whatever reason, they're not finding what we're doing as amusing as the older people are. And maybe some of that's on us, right? I mean,
right. Or finances could be a factor.
Right.
Yeah. Asabi?
Well, I was thinking about what Eric said, and I think he's absolutely right. And that's sort of what makes what we do unique, because of that communal experience. But, it's a digital world now, and somehow there is a community being created online. And, even if it's through the chats and you have these various people coming together. So this is a new thing for us. It's creating a whole new form of theater. And I think we have to probably acknowledge it and not be so old fashioned.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly something that we've thought of. Like when talking with a group of playwrights, a big thing that they said they felt was missing with like the Zoom play experience was the audience energy and the instant feedback of the audience. And I know that's something that we've adapted to with JTP putting out film content. We realized that it was more fun to do live watch parties because then the audience could type their comments and ask questions. And it was more of an experience of watching something together as opposed to watching something on your own time.
I can say I thought it was just me directing, having the play film to be streamed, of course, with nobody in the audience. And I kept thinking, it just doesn't really do it. But most of the directors I've spoken with, they say the same thing. It just loses something in translation. And so I think we all feel that for sure. So that audience definitely is needed. And even if the audience is there and it's live, but even, in Lee's show, I was so happy to hear the audience. I was like, yes,
Yeah.
there's an audience responding and they're there. This is theater. So I had no problems watching it, but watching it in the audience just loses something.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're going to transition now into some great audience questions that we've received. So some of the panelists are arts educators. Did the ability to make a living in your area of expertise lead you to education? Did you have other aspirations in the arts at first?
For myself, yeah, the education thing came second. I started teaching voice and then was asked to actually fill in to teach a drama class about 20 years ago. And then it all just kind of fell into place for me. And I found that I enjoyed it a lot. And of course, it provides, the health insurance and the steady income and everything. And I found that as I got older, performing seemed harder. So it's education is a benefit because you can direct and you can do as much or as little as you want with that. And that's an artistic outlet. And then you can say, well, I think I want to try to go to perform a little bit this season, but I'm not dependent on it.
I agree. Yeah, perform became secondary, but I do think I made a very conscious choice. I graduated from A&T with a BFA in performance, and I was trying to decide for my master's if I wanted to do performance, if I wanted to do dramaturge, if I wanted to do like directing. I was very interested in all of them, but in all, I knew that I wanted to be an educator. And after my master's, I felt like I wanted to be a mainstay in higher education. And that was when I decided I wanted a PhD. And I went straight through. I mean, I was working the whole time. So I think I had a vision of being an educator. Now, do I regret not performing more? Yes. And even now, I'd like to get on the stage. And, I want to be one of those educators who get to do it. But now I just don't have time to do it because I'm teaching and I'm directing and I'm doing administrative stuff for the department. And every once in a while, when my friends are doing something, I was like, I'll do it, cast me. And they're like, really? I'm like, yes, cast me. But you got to work with my schedule,
Yeah, got to work with the schedule. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, next question from Amelia. Auditions are a really unique way to gain entry into a job compared with other fields. As a director or decision maker, do you approach casting for paid roles differently than educational or volunteer experiences?
I do. I think in education, I do have to give consideration to certain things like if I feel like this person should have this experience in their 4-year tenure, is this person a senior? That kind of thing. I do give consideration to that. How committed this person is and has been. Professionally, no, I go very hard for casting and very picky about what it is and who it is I'm looking for. And we do try to do it in the educational setting because we say we want them to be ready for the professional world. So we try, but we don't really do it,
Yeah, sometimes we just want, there's a child that we want to have an experience and they show up and it, they make your your heart melt because they want it so badly, and it makes you, go, okay, I've got to do this for this child, and they'll remember it forever. So
That's right.
yeah, that's definitely motivating.
And it's funny because the audition is such an artificial experience, and the
Mhm.
skill of being a good auditioner is really different from being the skill of being a good actor or a good singer. And you hope that there's enough overlap to make the audition process worthwhile. But it's it's like testing, right? I mean, some people are great at it, and it doesn't always mean something.
Yeah.
That's a
I have
great.
one great audition song, but if you ever ask me to sing anything else, it all goes south.
Yeah, and I would also argue that I feel like auditioning skills apply very well to applying for other jobs and interviewing, because then it's like I am in the mindset, I'm playing the role of someone who would be good for this job.
Oh yeah,
That's very
so
true.
you take it, which is acting anyway.
Right. And we're running to the end of our time, but I wanted to end on this last audience question on a lighter note. Tell your favorite understudy story, perhaps a time when the show had to go on with a different person in a specific role.
Well, I as a director, and I didn't say this, I don't think I said this, but in casting, make sure your understudy is good because they may have to take the role. So I have had understudies that were not very good, and it was kind of like, well, I want to have this person, let me include them, and then that person end up having to take the role. So yeah, I've had a couple of situations, and I don't know if they were funny, but I think those understudies stepped up to the role. But I can say as a performer, and this is so years ago, a friend called and said, my actress is in distress, she's in the hospital, can you come and perform? I said, sure. So I went to his house that morning, I went over the script. It was only two characters, and then there was the character Jesus Christ, but nobody played it. So we always referred to Jesus Christ as if it was an energy on stage, which was very interesting in itself. Because one time I actually I thought I felt an energy, but anyway, that's a whole nother story. So I had a script in hand, and I did pretty good, except for we had this climatic moment, and it was the name of a god, and it was a hard name of the god, and I wanted to keep the moment. So I think I said something like, by the power of Nickelodeon. And then everybody was kind of looking at me like, did she say Nickelodeon? I couldn't think of anything else, and it just kind of came. But I did keep the energy, and I was true to the moment. But that whole Nickelodeon thing, it was hilarious afterwards.
My story is not as funny, but I did have a high schooler a number of years ago who had food poisoning from, I think, sushi. So that's a rule of mine now: don't eat sushi performance week. And it was, sometimes in high school you don't always have enough people for understudies. So this was a question of who can fit in the costume, and who kind of maybe knows the song just a little bit, one song. But it ended up just being, the costume. Who fits in this costume?
That's true.
When we did our first Wagner here, I don't usually engage understudies or covers, but for this one, I knew that the role would be really difficult to replace at short notice. So we heard this young guy in audition, and he didn't live here in Raleigh. I said, look, you don't even need to come to town. I'm just learn the part, and if something comes up, we'll give you a call. And then, of course, the star said, listen, I'm not feeling well. I'm going to be a day late. So I called him and said, listen, just come on up so you can be here in Raleigh, but we're still not going to need you. Well, sure enough, day after day, he kept saying, oh, I'm still not better. I'm still not better. And then finally, 48 hours before the show, the star was in the hospital. He was really sick. He's fine. But and so the young guy went on going and doing it. It was a big success. And next year, this fall, he's going to sing Siegfried in Berlin.
Oh, wow.
I'm really excited by that.
I mean, my favorite understudy story is not one with a show that I dealt with, but it was a show that happened in the town where I used to live. They were doing Annie, children's production of Annie in the winter, and they double cast Annie. So they had like Annie A and Annie B. And then the stomach flu went around the cast. And so on Annie A's night, she clearly wasn't feeling well and she kept insisting that she would still do the show. They start the show with Annie A, and then it becomes quickly apparent that Annie A can't do the show. So then the director's frantically on the phone trying to call Annie B's house to get Annie B to rush over to the theater to step in, and no one was answering. So then they had to pluck one of the orphans out of the chorus and just have her stand in as Annie. And she didn't have any of like the costumes or the wigs, so she had like blonde hair, but everyone kept remarking on her red hair. And then finally Annie B got, the family got the message. They brought Annie B over to the theater and she finished out the show. So that is how they went through 3 Annies in one night.
But the show must go on.
Exactly, the show must go on. And on that note, thank you to our panelists for their wonderful comments and insights. And to everybody watching, thank you for watching our live watch party and the panel. And Finding My Voice is the final show in our Virtually Together season. And we really look forward to seeing you again in October. And also, if your child still needs something to do this summer, we still have a few spots left in our Raleigh theater camp. So for all of the information about the theater camp and next season, please follow us on Facebook, the Justice Theater Project's Facebook page, or you can visit our website at thejusticetheaterproject.org, and that's theater with an ER. Thank you, and I hope that you all have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.